Big statement there by Prime Minister Modi at a plenary of the BRICS summit. Prime Minister Modi's big statement at BRICS. The BRICS represents 40% of humanity. Reiterates his comment about supporting dialogue and diplomacy and not war. This is after he made that comment directly to Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, yesterday. Also talks about the global south. Very, very significant viewer at a time when India is at loggerheads at one level with the West. Now seen with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, two leaders who the West label as the most isolated world leaders. Prime Minister Modi talking about how the BRICS is now representing 40% of humanity. Talks about how the relationships between these three countries, the relationships between the countries of BRICS, Africa, Russia and India is going to be the future of geopolitics, the future of the international order. So a great deal of messaging coming in from the Prime Minister, where he talks about this is an era of peace, not of war. He talks about the need to stop the radicalisation of youth. This is something that is a problem that Europe is facing in large measure right now. He also talks about how dialogue and diplomacy needs to be the way forward and not war. Remember, the Prime Minister had met the President of Iran yesterday. India has a very good relationship with the Israeli leadership as well. India has met with the United States earlier this year. Today and yesterday was the third meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Vladimir Putin just so far this year. There have been two meetings between Modi and the Ukrainian President Zelensky. So whichever war the world is experiencing right now, Indian foreign policy positions this country in a unique way, insofar as being able to say that dialogue and diplomacy needs to be the way out and not confrontation. I want to bring in a quick word from Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, who's been tracking every part of this. Geeta, what stood out for you from what the Prime Minister has said at the BRICS?
Well, all the pointers that you just spelled out, Shiv, some of them very, very significant. Remember, BRICS is expanding. It is a counter, and it has become a powerhouse. Having countries not just like Russia, India, China, which was originally RIC, we've seen the expansion from there to Brazil, South Africa, now 5 more countries, which includes the UAE. So it is going to be very important to see what the conversations and what we'll get to learn after the sessions are over. Some of them are closed doors. So what the conversations are going to be very important, because there are two conflicts and two important protagonists of the conflicts in the room. Russia on the Russia-Ukraine front, and Iran on the Israel-Hamas front, and the Israel-Iran front, if you may want to call it that. So you have very important countries in the room. Nobody wants war, but how to move forward. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been spelling that out for everybody. But he's also highlighted some very important issues, Shiv. Double standards by the world, double standards of the world when it comes to terrorism, counter-terrorism. And that certainly is an area that's of massive concern to India. India continues to face terrorism. We just had a terror attack in Kashmir. And despite that, there is no consensus even in defining the word terrorism at the United Nations. So highlighting that has been very important, apart from the fact that he does speak about how these countries need to come together. And right now, I see many other aspects, Shiv, and we can discuss that in detail later. But BRICS is an alternative. We are looking at de-dollarization of the economy. They're talking about the BRICS Bank has been there for a very long time. But should they start dealing and trading in local currency or have a BRICS currency, then it could spell a lot of trouble for those who are trying to control global economy through their currencies.
The power of BRICS, the future of a international grouping that represents 40% of humanity, the double standards of the West. Many, many big takeaways from the Prime Minister's address at the BRICS Summit. I want to introduce all of our guests joining us on this special broadcast this evening. Geeta continues to stay with us. Sana Hashmi, welcome. She's a visiting fellow with the Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. She's based in Taipei. Sana, good to see you. Lieutenant General D.B. Shiketkar is a former Deputy Director General Military Operations. He's a well-known commentator on all things strategic and military. Veena Sikri is a former Indian ambassador and diplomat and a commentator on international affairs. A very warm welcome to all of you. Over the next couple of hours, we are hoping to get very deep into the big Modi-Xi meet, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but I wanted to get some opening comments from our guest joining us now on what the Prime Minister has just said at BRICS. Veena Sikri, I'd like to start with you. What stood out for you? The importance of BRICS has assumed a kind of larger-than-life aspect this time, given what's going on between India and especially the West, but also everything that's going on between Israel and Iran and in other parts of the world. What stood out for you?
Well, I must say that one of the most important comments that Prime Minister has made, maybe not in today's speech, but which came out in the last couple of days, is that BRICS is not an anti-Western grouping, it is a non-Western grouping.
Yeah.
I think this is a very important concept, that BRICS has now established itself as a meeting of the global South. Of course, Russia and China are there, who are not always considered as part of the global South. But I think India's being there, and the way in which this has evolved from the RIC, from Russia, India, China, to Brazil, Russia, India, China, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now the additional members coming in, this shows the growing importance that the world is feeling for this non-Western grouping. I think that's very important, because most of the comments that our Prime Minister made in his speech reflected the achievements of BRICS, the way they have literally built it up one brick at a time, whether it is on trade, whether it is on environment, whether it's just the number of people who are there, you know, as you said, representing 40% of the world's population. This is absolutely significant. And I think the points that he made on double standards is very important, because it hits right home, considering what we are facing from Canada and other countries, and what the comments that Panun is making from American soil. All these shows to us, and the respect that our Prime Minister is receiving in BRICS, not only from President Putin. They had a meeting yesterday, and again, President Putin said that he is, looking forward and welcoming Prime Minister Modi's role in resolving the Ukraine-Russia crisis. Then he's meeting with the President of Iran. The President of Iran said the same thing about the West Asian crisis, about the Israel-Hamas conflict. So I think that our Prime Minister's very significant role in this meeting of BRICS as the leader, the outstanding leader of the moment, the way he is being welcomed as a person who can resolve global problems, whether it is in Ukraine, Russia, or the Middle East, the way that he has explained how India has contributed to the building up of BRICS. This is very important. Whether he was talking about financial transactions, financial infrastructure, digital payment infrastructure, whether he was talking about the contribution on green energy, contribution on the environment, and welcoming other BRICS countries to join and add their contribution. So he is obviously focusing that BRICS has done a lot to do more, to be a relevant player. We need to come together and build on these achievements of the past. I think it's a very important statement, and it reflects in many ways the importance being given to Prime Minister Modi's presence at the BRICS summit by all the players, not only at the negotiating table of BRICS, but outside in his meetings and the bilaterals. Of course, we are all looking forward to the bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi.
And that is where our gaze is fixed right now, because the BRICS plenary session is over. The Prime Minister has spoken. The time window for that Modi-Xi bilateral is anywhere between 4:40 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. Let's put all our guests on the screen quickly. Bringing in Lieutenant General Shiketkar for a quick comment on this. General Shiketkar, the Prime Minister, not for the first time. Let's put all the guests on the screen quickly. General Shiketkar, the Prime Minister, not for the first time, has said, dialogue and diplomacy needs to be the way forward, not war. Very important in the context now, especially given that the Indian and the Chinese leadership are about to hold a long-expected bilateral that is going to happen now after the two sides have announced some kind of resolution. All disclaimers apply. There is no euphoria that we are certainly reporting. We are very cautious when it comes to reporting anything pertaining to China. But your opening comments, sir, as we count down to the Modi-Xi handshake.
Having heard the Honorable Prime Minister very carefully, his comments during his address to the conference, I must say, he totally avoided any conflict situation anywhere, though he made an oblique reference what is happening in the country without naming anybody. And that shows the maturity of the leadership, political leadership in country. Secondly, what will be discussed between the Prime Minister of India and the President of China after some time will be totally a different issue. There will be a number of common issues, but I do hope that it will be, one of the things will be that peace and progress can only result in a longer term friendship and development between any nation and all the nation. That is probably going to be the theme.
Yes.
Secondly, I don't think at that level they'll make a mention about the conflict which is going on in Galwan or on the border and so on. Because we must remember that just in 2019, when the President of China came to India, in Tamil Nadu he was hosted. After going back, within 6 months we had Galwan.
Yes.
So therefore, correct. I think this reference will hold good, but without naming anybody and without saying so. What transpires between the two of them at an individual level will be a different thing. I don't think any communication will be issued on that thing as to what they discussed, but it is reasonable to assume, having been the student of the international science and the strategy, it is reasonable to assume that some oblique reference will certainly be made by India that in case the two countries have to progress forward together, conflict is not the answer. Conflict has never been the answer to any situation. And
Sana,
that is how probably the dialogue will
let
go
me bring
on.
Sana Hashmi in also for a quick opening comment before we hopefully get some live images from Kazan of the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President. Sana, you've been, very correctly, and I agree with you, noting a sound of caution as far as India and China are concerned. The surround sound, has cleared the decks for some kind of a resolution. We affirm that this is going to be a long, arduous, complicated, and by no means straightforward process towards de-induction, de-escalation and disengagement. But where do you stand on this particular meeting itself? If we zoom in now to Kazan, to this handshake that's expected between Modi and Xi, what do you expect to see happen?
I think it's definitely a huge development. Specifically, Prime Minister Modi is meeting President Xi after 5 years. And if we look at it, other world leaders have actually met Xi Jinping. So this is not something that is not supposed to happen. So I do believe that that's a good development. But when we talk about the recent agreement and the prospects of India-China relations, I'm not very optimistic. It's just a CBM. Facts on the ground hasn't changed and it is not going to change. So it's just an agreement. It's not the border dispute resolution. We are definitely going to see the standoff as well. So I think the idea was to normalize and stabilize the relation. And this meeting was very important in that context. And I do believe that this is a step in the right direction.
A step in the right direction. The mood on the ground has been set. Gaurav is live with us from Kazan, where that milestone handshake will be taking place between the two leaders in just a few minutes from now. Gaurav, to set the context of this meeting, the two sides had talked about a phased kind of resolution where a long journey towards normalization of border ties will take place, particularly in eastern Ladakh. What have you been hearing over the last 48 hours since it became clear that the two leaders were going to meet? What are the two sides saying in Kazan, Gaurav?
as far as the Indian side is concerned, there is cautious optimism or there's realization that China is reading the writing on the wall. If China thought India will buckle under pressure, roll over and play dead, that clearly did not happen. Whether it was in Doklam in 2017 or Galwan in 2020, and the standoff continues even now. Whether it's Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who may have said that, let relationship continue, borders can be addressed by future generations. India is not buying that logic of the Chinese, especially at a time when for decades the Chinese continued with salami slicing of Indian territory and were only stopped in Galwan at 2020 or in the north and the south bank of Pengong So, where India saw QPQ operations. So if China does respect strength, then this is display of that strength on ground tactically in the QPQ operations that brought the initial disengagement, but very clearly only disengagement and neither de-escalation and nor de-induction of troops from the line of actual control. So that standoff does remain. However, an important first step could well be taken between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi in that discussion that will happen just, perhaps in about half an hour from now, when China and India perhaps give the two heads of state and government will give higher direction to their respective diplomats, to their respective armies on what needs to be done next. Does China actually intend to walk the talk? If Chinese President Xi Jinping says that it's not an era of conflict, it's an era of peace and there has to be peace and cooperation in the world, then he must walk that talk and ensure that those 50,000 Chinese troops first de-escalate and then de-induct from eastern Ladakh. Point one. Point two, confidence building measures that had been painstakingly put in place from 1993 to 1996 to 2014, including steps that the Chinese had suggested in BDCA or the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, violated by China itself in 2020. Will China then come up with new confidence building measures and practice that? That remains to be seen, Shiv. So it's a very crucial meeting, not very high expectations from what will emerge, but even if a few steps are taken, it could lead to a long journey ahead.
So, that is actually the point, and Gaurav's point is a very important one, viewer, and it bears constant repeating as we count down to this Modi-Xi handshake, which is that no forward movement is usually the expectation, but the smallest forward movement is definitely a positive. The fact that the two sides have been talking right through a war-like situation has been a positive. That, in fact, has been a takeaway. But the fact that the two sides are now even talking the language of a mutual resolution and the resumption of patrolling and an intent towards normalization is definitely a good thing. This does not in any measure mean that India is being naive or it's let its guard down or has suddenly started trusting China. None of those things are happening. This is happening mutually, and there are various reasons for it, which we will, of course, get into. I want to put that picture back on our screen for a moment before I go to Veena Sikri and Geeta, of the three leaders, Putin, Xi Jinping and Modi. This is a picture that's gone absolutely viral on social media for some reason. Not hard to imagine. It's got all of the three leaders with a big smile on their face. All three of them are beaming. Most people are wondering, what is Putin pointing at? What is he saying? So this has become a bit of a meme on social media. But Veena Sikri, Prime Minister Modi, when he spoke to... Okay, Veena is not with us. I'll go to Geeta for a moment on that. Geeta, when Prime Minister Modi spoke to Putin yesterday, he offered India's help in terms of being an interlocutor or some kind of support in order to be a go-between between Russia and Ukraine in any possible way that would be necessary. This picture makes me wonder about Putin's role in being a kind of interlocutor between India and China. What kind of role has he played? I don't want to suggest anything, but he's great friends with Xi, he's great friends with Modi. Has there been a Putin role here?
Very interesting, Shiv, that you talk about the picture. It's very, very important and significant because while everybody talks about Quad leadership and the photographs and where India is placed and where the United States of America is, so on and so forth, this picture, Shiv, is very important because it's the original RIC, it's the Russia, India, China that had always bothered the West, that had always bothered countries who do not think the same way as Russia or China does, or for that matter, India even. And on many counts, especially in most of the conflicts, most of the areas where the West has stakes and has entered wars, it's Russia, China, India, interestingly, who have the same foreign policy, who've always been on the same page, although bilaterally they might not agree on many things, especially China and India. India, again, very uniquely positioned, has great ties with the West, but also this picture speaks volumes. And you're rightly saying it when you say that while India is offering a helping hand in resolving the Russia-Ukraine war, look at this picture where it almost seems like President Putin has brought China and India together at a very critical juncture. Now, a lot of people say forward movement, small steps are big when it comes to India and China. But the fact is that there's one very important thing that has happened over here, that India has not bowed, that India did not give in, that India did not bow down, did not give land away, saying, okay, let's negotiate. And then the negotiation goes on forever. They stuck their ground. They said that unless and until this issue is resolved, there is going to be no forward movement. Now, we do not know whether if there's going to be any phased manner. And, China's response has been ambiguous. Okay. They said phased manner. Now, phased manner for China can be 6 months, a year, or maybe a decade. We do not really know. But the fact is that India is not budging. That's the story over here. And very interesting to see Putin play that mediator in many ways than one between China and India.
Most definitely. Sana, your thoughts on that? The kind of role that Putin has played in Modi and Xi getting ready to shake hands now?
Please think that it is playing a role and it wants to play a role, because if you look at it, it's definitely not in Russia's interest when India is moving towards and more aligned with the West. So this idea that, in fact, Prime Minister Modi is also seen as a peace broker, primarily with Russia-Ukraine crisis. So perhaps with China and India, this would be the major achievement of Russia. If India, China sits on the negotiation table and talk about their differences and, if at all, being able to resolve their differences. But definitely it's in the interest of Russia. It's because if there are differences with China, that means India will be much more aligned with the West now it is. Look at the rejuvenation of the quadrilateral dialogue. Active, proactive role in the Indo-Pacific region. This is primarily because of China. And this is something that is not in the interest of Russia.
General Shiketkar, Putin's role in this, unexpected thaw that we are seeing right now, obviously those who are watching these developments closely, are making very good sense of it. As Sana said, the fact that there is the Quad, there is the emerging India-US relationship. It is in Russia's interest to make sure that relations between India and China don't deteriorate further. So how do you see Putin's role here? He's very much living up to that role in those pictures that are coming out from BRICS.
It's a very good observation you made. There is always a role for the well-wisher countries who are keen to wish India well. And Russia, under the leadership of Putin, Mr. Putin, is one of them. Secondly, on this issue, Russia and China had a problem of the boundary dispute among themselves. Allow me to give you a brief background. In 1993, when we were finalizing the Peace and Tranquility Agreement, which was signed by during the Prime Ministership of Narasimha Rao, I was there. And we studied all the nations with whom the Chinese have got the conflict.